Maria Paz, very happy to be here this morning. So we're going to talk about fundraising. Before we start, we'll go ahead and I'll tell you a little bit about me. This is me. I was 6 years old. I attended Oasis Elementary School here in the Coachella Valley. As you can tell, my mom was also an innovator. I had really short hair at the time, so she made braids out of yarn. Here, grew up in Coachella Valley, like I said, youngest of 6. After high school, I went off to college at University of Redlands. I studied global business. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do after that. I knew I wanted to make a difference in the community. At the time, I also felt like I needed to learn more. I wanted to do more than just come back home. This was about 15 years ago. So I applied to a fellowship in Sacramento. I was accepted. I was one of 3 fellows in 2012. And I'd never been to Sacramento. I packed one bag. I got a one-way ticket to Sacramento, and I spent a couple of years there doing government relations, legislative work in the Capitol. After that, if the fellowship was over, I got a job offer in LA. We, as children, we never really went to LA. For my parents, it was really far. It was a really long drive, although it's only 2 hours from the Coachella Valley. And again, I got a one-way ticket, made my way to LA, and I was there for 5 years. I worked for one of the largest federally qualified health centers, Ultimate Health Centers in LA. I did policy work as well as government affairs. My portfolio covered most of LA County elected officials in policy work. As being one of the largest federally qualified health centers, not only did we focus on health issues, but also affordable housing, LGBTQ+, all types of policies that meant for equitable, affordable healthcare for minorities. If none of you know about Ultimate is one of the largest. Is also, at the time, it was a $500 million nonprofit. After spending 5 years there, I realized it was time to come home. That's when I heard about Alianza Coachella Valley. They were part of the California Endowment, one of 14 chapters of Building Healthy Communities, and they were starting their own nonprofit. They needed someone to launch their development department. So that's when 10 years away from home, and I realized it was time to come home. It was a great opportunity to do exactly what I had wanted to do when I graduated from college, was give back to the community. So here I am. I was with Alianza for 3 years. This year, I realized I wanted to do a little bit more and support other nonprofits. I realized in my time with Alianza that there's so many nonprofits doing such great jobs and such great work for the community. However, the capacity to fundraise is limited. Therefore, I wanted to support in other ways. And I hope that today, by the end of this workshop, you can take at least 1 or 2 of these suggestions and learnings and go back to your drawing board and really reassess your fundraising plan and implement one of these suggestions. And we'll start with the basics, the 6 rights of fundraising. Fundraising is the right person asking the right prospective donor for the right gift, for the right program at the right time in the right way. And this sounds all easy, right? But it takes a lot of effort. It takes time. It takes strategy. And I know what we all need and want more of is time. I noticed that a lot of you one person, right, for the organization. A lot of you sometimes just it's a volunteer gig. You have two others. So not only are you managing a whole nonprofit, you're also the development officer dealing with HR issues and so forth. But I can't say this enough. It really is about strategy. It's about really creating a plan that works for you, no matter how small or how big you are. And all of these things matter when you're creating your calendar, your fundraising goal. So keep this in mind as we go through this presentation. Also, the attitudes towards money and fundraising. I think from a young age, we're taught not to ask for money, right? And so I'm here to tell you that most people actually appreciate when you do. That's only if you're prepared. So money from an early age is just kind of like talking about sex and death and religion and politics, if not worse. And so we have to also take in consideration that it's not genetic and it can be unlearned. And it's actually really good to talk about money with your executive director, with your staff. All of it is public information. And also this is a way to get them involved, right? Outside of their other responsibilities. The taboo about talking about money, it's mostly just in the US. Other cultures, they talk about money. Another thing that I wanted to note that as I was going through this, I found out, so as we grow up, we are taught that money is a root of evil, right? And then I found out that the actual quote from the Testament is, for the love of money is the root of all evil. So just wanted to put that out there as we're thinking about money and what it means to us. So today's workshop agenda is 1, setting a realistic goal; 2, creating a fundraising pyramid; 3, setting an annual calendar of efforts; 4, making fundraising a culture and less a job; 5, increasing commitment and consistency. And then we'll end off with a few takeaways, conclusions. And you can interrupt me at any time. Mihai will be he'll be in charge of the chat. So please feel free to chime in. So setting a realistic goal. So I love numbers. I like budgets. I love spreadsheets. I base all of my fundraising on numbers. So the first 6 steps, right, for a comprehensive goal setting: determine the real value needed. Some people call it true cost, right? For me, what I see, and just an example, one of the organizations I'm working with now, they don't have staff, but they have a ton of volunteers. So my suggestion is always keep track of volunteer hours. Nothing is free. So make sure you're setting, even as you're logging into webinars after hours, webinars on the weekends, all of that that's time spent, and time is money. 2, determine donor and funder capacity to give. That's prospect research, right? Also takes time, but it can be very simple as just what I do. When I started, when I didn't have a software, it was just Googling, right? Making sure everything you can find online nowadays. Also, if capital improvements are involved, obtain actual cost estimates from qualified vendors. Include cost of fundraising. A lot of us don't do that. It's also very important when you're talking to donors about how much it costs, where the money is going for. And then you also get a really good understanding of how much it's going to cost. For example, your return on investment when you're planning an event, when you are planning getting a contract, any type of event, any type of effort it costs. So make sure that you're keeping track of that. And so folks, it helps when you're thinking about calendars and efforts. Include real overheads rate of staffing and running your nonprofit. A lot of folks go with 10%. Nowadays, foundations are even allowing 15 to 18%. What I also like to do is setting money for more of a little stash on the side, right? I think nowadays, as I'm speaking to more foundations, they really like when nonprofits have a goal for sustainability. It's not just year by year, but really putting aside a percentage for the next year and building up from there. So don't be afraid to talk about those things, to talk about not only the real overhead, but also making sure that you have something on the side for, and it's not even about emergencies, it's just thinking long-term sustainability. And of course, include donor recognition. We'll talk a little bit more about this after. So setting a realistic goal. I want to ask all of you, what are your challenges when you're setting an annual fundraising goal? Would anyone like to share? For me, I can say when I was doing this work, and what I see nowadays too, is getting those real costs, volunteer time, anything that has to do, in-kind donations are very important to note. Although you're not paying for any of that now, you will. When you have half of your volunteers that no longer can give the time, you'll have to hire some staff. So just keeping those numbers in mind, so when that happens, you won't have to go back to looking at hours or notes. So it's really good to prepare ahead of time, having those numbers on hand. We'll go off to creating a fundraising pyramid. So I wonder how many of you have heard of, it's the same as the gift range chart. And I love this exercise because it really gives you an understanding of gives you an idea, and you can plan really well with this. So creating a fundraising pyramid, it's the 4 functions, major functions. It's a planning instrument, right? It's tool for testing and measuring, device to raise, giving sites, and means of evaluating. So one thing to keep in mind when you're creating a fundraising pyramid is it can be changed. It can be molded at any time, but it's a really good start when you're thinking numbers. Once you know your expenses for the year, you know how much it's going to cost to run your organization, and you're thinking, okay, now I have to fundraise. How many donors do I need? How many people do I need to ask? For what amount? And so forth. So the profile of the annual fund, keep in mind that your base donation, 70% of donors, upgraded 20%, and majors are example of this. So you'll see 70% donors makes 20% of the money. So let's think $100,000, right? 70% of your base, you will fundraise 20% of your money. 20% of upgraded gifts, it'll be another 20%. But major gifts, 10% of your donors will make up for 60% of your fundraising goal. So we'll go through this simple exercise of creating a fundraising pyramid, aka gift range chart for 100,000. And I'll be sending you a copy of this afterwards, and hopefully you can implement this for your annual fundraising plan next year. So creating a fundraising pyramid. I'll start with the basics. Here, the first two gifts should equal 10% of the goal, or 5% each. The next four gifts should be equal 10% of the goal. And then also, this is very flexible. I started with 100,000. You can do what is recommended, that it's at least $25,000. Anything above that, the gift range chart works really well. So here you'll see the gift range, the number of gifts, and the cumulative gifts. The prospect numbers, the ratio is 5:1. You start with 5:1. The cumulative number of prospects, the range, and the total. As you lower, then the ratio then goes down to 4:1. You'll see it here, and the numbers start adding up. So when I was fundraising for nonprofits, I liked major gifts. I would rather invest my time in major giving rather than base donors. It takes just as much energy and time, but you're just focusing on that 10%. And as you'll see, the prospect numbers increase dramatically as the numbers decrease. So this is $100,000. You start with 5,000. You can start with even one gift of 25,000 and go from there. This is just a little bit more realistic when you're thinking of just major donors or money coming from donors rather than foundations and other endowments or anything like that. It's more of a major donor. Setting an annual calendar of efforts. So we all love events, right? The annual gala, we have donor recognitions, all of this. One thing to keep in mind, and it's basing your efforts on dates and timing for cultivation and solicitation and stewardship. Also, being very strategic when you have these events. When are your donors in town, right? Your return on investment for each of these efforts, social media efforts, all the above. So I'll show you a video, which I think it's really cool. And I'll give you also, and maybe it'll help you rethink of your strategy, moving away. A lot of nonprofits are moving away from their annual galas and their events, not only because of COVID, but because it takes so much effort and the return on investment is very low sometimes. And then also now I learned it's the blue sky era, and you'll see it here. So I'll play it for you. There you go. So a few takeaways from that, right? I was really surprised by a lot of those statistics. It just really, to emphasize on really what kind of efforts are you setting up for next year? So you're creating your calendar of events, your gatherings, your galas. How important is social media, all these different avenues to reach folks through YouTube, through videos. Now it's TikTok, right? I think I'm between that era of before and after. I haven't really caught up to everything that's happening now, but I do see the impact of social media, of technology in our fundraising. And so I'm just wondering what all of you are doing to reach that new generation that, you know, they don't watch TV anymore. They don't look at their mail. They probably don't even have a mailbox. How are you reaching the younger generation and still keeping in touch with your older donors? So this one's always fun, right? Making fundraising a culture and less a job. How do you get your team motivated? How do you get your board of directors excited? How do you get them to give? For me, it was always really delegating has always been a challenge, but it's just so important. I can't say that enough. It's when you're thinking responsibilities of fundraising, you can't do it alone. You really need your staff and board members involved. They all have a role in fundraising. Also, it's important to talk about financials, right? How many of your staff understand financial statements? Do you share your fundraising plan with them? Do you give them a role to play? It's as simple as creating a list of 5-10 things to help with fundraising. At the end of the year, how are you sending all of those letters out to donors? How are you sending your thank you cards? How are you, and I say this because they sound like very simple tasks, but they take energy, take a lot of time. Those tedious things that you think you're supposed to do by yourself, but honestly, if you bring in your team, your board members, it's just so much more simple, and you can do other things as well. It gives you time to do some of that real work. Also, another way, it's implementing sharing, whether it's during your staff meetings, also maybe your board of directors doing a presentation of inspiration, success stories that you can share with them. You probably sometimes as a development director, you feel alone, right? It's a lot of work. You're very stressed. But sharing those donor stories and inspiration success stories, it also helps the team understand and know that they're part of it, that it couldn't have been done without them. Again, sharing financial statements with staff. What we did once was bring in someone to explain and teach us how to read, monthly statements, your cash flow statements, revenue and expense, all of those things. If you empower your team and you also, you give them that responsibility that they're also responsible for the financial well-being of the organization. Another thing that I want to point out is the board of directors. I think it's key that they give, no matter if it's, $100, $5,000, it shows commitment. And often donors will ask you how many of your board of directors give. another question, we can talk about this after the presentation, but how are you inspiring your board of directors? How are you engaging? How are you getting them excited about giving? Increasing commitment and consistency. So great fundraising successes are born out of repetition and consistency, not wishful thinking. And I'll go through a few of these items. So what can you do to maintain consistency in your fundraising program? Plan your work. Do fewer things better, delegate responsibilities, create accountability measures. So the one that stands out for me and that I can really relate to is do fewer things better. We often take on more than we can do. Doing more is not always better, especially if resources are limited. So I really emphasize on building a plan, building a gift range chart right from the beginning, from the get-go, looking at your true cost, doing a calendar of events month per month on whether it's as simple as putting a post on Facebook, planning your annual giving event, planning your donor recognition, happy hour or dinner. All those things complement each other and part of the bigger strategic plan. So plan your work. Don't try to do too many things, too many events. Events take energy. Make sure you delegate responsibilities. One of the examples that I read about delegating responsibilities is, let's say you meet a donor, right? They're your donor. And I used to think that he's my donor. He is my friend. We're buddies. He wants to see me. He wants to talk to me. And at the beginning, that's okay. And they probably do. But after a certain time, after you build that relationship, after you cultivate the relationship, you can delegate some of those responsibilities to other staff, to other board of director members of the thank you notes, right? They want to hear from other folks. They want to hear about how the organization is going, the impact of their donation. They don't always have to hear from you. They really appreciate when others also approach them. So delegate responsibilities such as even a phone call, right? Preparing for a phone call that can go to the executive director or other team members. So it doesn't always have to be you, even though you think that that's what they want. At the end of the day, maybe they do, but they want to hear from you, but not always. So keep that in mind. Were you thinking about picking up the phone and calling, or sitting down and writing all those thank you cards? And then to conclude, things to remember. So I like all of these and I'll share with you. Give yourself before asking others to give. That's a big one. Donate whatever amount it is before asking others to give. You believe in the mission, you want others to believe in your mission. Therefore, you have to show that you believe in the mission, whether it's monthly, whether it's a one-time donation. Give yourself before asking others to give. People do not give to causes, people give to people with causes. As solicitors, we do not have the right to deprive anyone of the privilege of saying no. And what I like to think about when I see this, it's not about a no, it's just a not yet, not now. So there's always another opportunity. If your knees are shaking, remember, kick yourself aside and let your cause walk in. Remember this one. We think we're never asking for ourselves. You're asking for the mission. The principal reason people do not give is they're not asked. This happened to me a few times. Again, my knees were shaking. I was so nervous. And at the end of that conversation with the donor, they said, thank you for asking. Or I also get those like, oh, I thought you'd never ask, right? And we get so nervous about asking, and they're already on our side, right? It's just getting through the asking phase, and it could be for many reasons, but at the end of the day, we're not asking for ourselves, we're asking for the cause, we're asking for our team, we're asking for those that we're trying to help. Rarely do we know the donor's real interests, and often when we ask, they will tell us what they are. And the solicitation is never completed until you close. This is really important. Honor donors by asking at the right level, at the level of the donor's perception of their own ability to give. An effective solicitation, the right person, going back to the basics, right? The right person asking the right prospect for the right gift at the right time for the right purpose in the right way. Being strategic, having a plan, having numbers to show, that's becoming a little bit more, it's becoming more popular. Before it was more, people give for causes, right? And to people with causes, but they want to see where the money is going, the type of impact that it's having in the community or your mission. And so just also being very strategic about it, the numbers. An effective solicitation is 60% listening and 40% talking. It's really important to understand your donors, what they love, what they give to, their ways of giving, if it's not monetary, if it's, you know, through their voice and advocacy, advocating for you, for your mission. So I know it's a lot of information. It's easier said than done. I can assure you, but I think with having a good plan, it's all possible.